On a quiet morning in the Gulf of Mexico, the waters shimmered under a sun that offered no warning of the storm gathering beneath. In May 1942, Mexican oil tankers, the lifeblood of the nation's industry, were suddenly targeted by German submarines. The attacks came without declaration, striking deep into Mexico's sense of security and sovereignty. Families in coastal towns watched in disbelief as reports came in. Ships that had set sail full of crude and hope were now shattered wrecks, claimed by torpedoes from the far reaches of the Atlantic. The nation, long removed from the direct battles raging in Europe and Asia, felt the war arrive on its doorstep with terrifying clarity. Newspapers ran headlines describing the attacks in vivid detail, stirring outrage among the citizens, and calling on the government to take decisive action. In those tense days, Mexico faced a choice: remain a silent observer in a global conflict or join the fight alongside the Allies. The answer, though fraught with risks, would soon shape the destiny of a group of young men who became known as the Aztec Eagles. The decision to enter the war was not made lightly. Mexico had long maintained a policy of neutrality, focused on internal stability and reconstruction following its own turbulent revolution. But the repeated targeting of its ships, coupled with economic pressure from Axis-aligned forces in the Americas, left the government with no room for hesitation. On May 22, 1942, Mexico officially declared war on Germany, Italy, and Japan. This historic announcement was met with both pride and apprehension. While many Mexicans cheered the nation's resolve to defend its sovereignty and ideals, others feared the consequences of sending troops and pilots into a conflict thousands of miles from home. Still, the government's resolve was firm: Mexico would actively contribute to the Allied effort, proving that the country could defend its people and stand in solidarity against global tyranny. Among the most ambitious projects undertaken to support the war was the creation of an elite air squadron that would represent Mexico on foreign soil. The unit, officially designated Escuadrón 201, would later become legendary under the nickname Aztec Eagles. The selection process for pilots was rigorous. Volunteers from all over the country, some already skilled aviators, others newly trained, were scrutinized for courage, technical skill, and adaptability. Each candidate underwent psychological evaluations, physical examinations, and countless hours of technical instruction. The Mexican Air Force understood that these men would not simply be defending their homeland, they would be operating alongside some of the most experienced Allied forces in the world. The stakes were enormous, and the responsibility weighed heavily on every aspiring pilot who walked through the gates of the air base with dreams of flight and duty. Once chosen, the Aztec Eagles were sent to the United States for advanced training, as part of an unprecedented cooperative effort between Mexico and its northern neighbor. The journey itself was symbolic. Pilots who had flown over the plains and mountains of Mexico were now preparing to face the skies of the Pacific Theater, thousands of miles from home. American instructors, some veterans of earlier combat campaigns, guided the Mexicans through rigorous programs designed to prepare them for the harsh realities of modern warfare. They trained in the operation of the P-47 Thunderbolt, a fighter-bomber whose size and firepower demanded both precision and endurance. The aircraft, unlike anything most of the pilots had flown before, became an extension of their determination, a machine that would carry them through missions where every second could mean the difference between life and death. The training was exhaustive. From dawn until dusk, pilots learned formation flying, aerial combat maneuvers, bombing accuracy, and close air support coordination. Every sortie, every simulated dogfight, was designed to forge men capable of facing the unpredictable chaos of combat. Instructors emphasized discipline, situational awareness, and rapid decision-making, knowing that in the heat of battle, hesitation could be fatal. Despite the intensity, camaraderie blossomed among the trainees. They shared stories of their homes, their families, and the landscapes that had shaped their early years. Bonds formed quickly, grounded in shared risk and a mutual understanding that they were about to enter a chapter of history that would forever separate them from ordinary life. Meanwhile, news from the Pacific and European theaters reminded them of the stakes. Japanese forces had advanced through Southeast Asia, capturing islands and colonies with speed and precision, while German troops continued their relentless campaigns across Europe. Allied leaders emphasized the importance of every contributing nation. For Mexico, participation was not just a demonstration of solidarity, it was an assertion that the country would not be a bystander in the defining struggle of the century. The pilots internalized this responsibility. Each training flight became a rehearsal for a mission that could alter the perception of their country in the eyes of the world. Pride and anxiety intertwined, creating a tension that hung over the squadron like the clouds that often obscured their practice skies. By 1944, the Aztec Eagles were ready for deployment. They had proven their skill in exercises and simulated combat, demonstrating both technical proficiency and mental fortitude. Departure for the Pacific Theater was a moment of intense emotion. Families and military officials gathered to bid farewell to the young men who represented the nation's aspirations abroad. Aircraft carriers and transport ships carried the pilots and their Thunderbolts across the ocean, where the dense blue of the sea mirrored the uncertainty and hope carried in their hearts. Each pilot was acutely aware that their mission would place them in the center of a brutal war, far from the familiar sights of home. Yet, the call to serve, the obligation to defend their nation and ideals, drove them forward. Upon arrival in the Philippines, the squadron was quickly integrated into Allied command structures, operating alongside the U.S. 5th Air Force. Their primary mission was clear: provide air support for ground troops, conduct bombing raids against entrenched Japanese positions, and execute strafing runs to weaken enemy supply lines. The Aztec Eagles entered the theater with a combination of pride and humility. They were aware that their actions would be closely observed, not only by Allied commanders but by the citizens back home who awaited news of their courage. Every sortie carried the weight of national expectation, every maneuver symbolized Mexico's commitment to global security. Despite the tension, the pilots maintained an unwavering focus, relying on training, instinct, and trust in one another to survive each operation. As the first missions commenced, the Aztec Eagles quickly earned a reputation for precision and bravery. Flying over dense jungles, volcanic landscapes, and coastal areas, they executed attacks on well-fortified positions, often under heavy fire. Enemy artillery and anti-aircraft defenses posed constant threats, but the pilots adapted with skill, using their knowledge of the Thunderbolt and lessons learned during intensive training. Each successful mission boosted confidence and strengthened the squadron's cohesion. Reports from Allied commanders highlighted their effectiveness and commitment, noting that the Mexican pilots, though new to overseas combat, displayed discipline and courage on par with more seasoned units. Back in Mexico, news of their achievements traveled fast. Newspapers ran stories about the Aztec Eagles, describing their missions, bravery, and the symbolic importance of their presence in a distant war. Citizens followed updates with fervor, recognizing that the young pilots were not only fighting for Allied victories but also shaping the nation's identity on the world stage. Their actions became a source of inspiration, a testament to Mexico's ability to rise to extraordinary challenges and participate meaningfully in global events. The stories of daring flights, precise bombing runs, and aerial duels became part of a larger narrative of national pride and commitment to justice. By the end of their first months in combat, the Aztec Eagles had begun to forge a legacy. They were no longer just a group of trained aviators, they were symbols of a nation's courage and resolve, capable of projecting Mexico's influence far beyond its borders. Each mission, whether successful or perilous, added to a growing sense of identity and accomplishment. For the pilots themselves, the experience reshaped their understanding of duty, camaraderie, and the personal cost of defending ideals in a world at war. Into the fire, combat in the Pacific. The early morning mist clung to the dense jungles of Luzon as the Aztec Eagles Thunderbolts roared into the sky, engines cutting through the humid air with a sound both terrifying and exhilarating. For the Mexican pilots, the reality of war had shifted from distant news reports to visceral, tangible danger. Each mission carried a weight that textbooks and training exercises could never convey, the knowledge that beneath them, hidden in the foliage, Japanese troops waited, their weapons trained upward, ready to turn the skies into a gauntlet. There were no warnings beyond the distant crack of anti-aircraft fire, no time to second-guess decisions. Survival depended on split-second judgments, the cohesion of the squadron, and the unspoken trust between men who had become brothers in arms. The first few sorties were a baptism by fire. Targets were carefully selected: enemy supply depots, fortified positions, communication hubs, but no amount of planning could account for the chaos of real combat. Clouds of black smoke, rising from explosions below, obscured terrain and forced pilots to rely on instinct and coordination. Visibility could vanish in seconds, and in the low-hanging fog over mountains, even a seasoned flyer could lose orientation. Yet the Aztec Eagles adapted with remarkable speed. Their rigorous training in the United States, combined with the discipline instilled by the Mexican Air Force, allowed them to maintain formation under fire and carry out objectives with precision. Observers from the 5th Air Force took notice, noting that despite inexperience in actual battle, the Mexican squadron demonstrated an unusual calm under pressure, earning a reputation as reliable and courageous allies. Flying over enemy territory revealed the scale of the challenge. Japanese fortifications were meticulous, often blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. Encampments were shielded by trees, rivers, and terrain features that made bombing runs difficult and dangerous. Anti-aircraft guns erupted suddenly, sending flak clouds spiraling into the sky, forcing pilots to perform evasive maneuvers that tested every ounce of their skill. The Thunderbolt, sturdy and powerful, could withstand considerable punishment, but no machine could replace human reflexes and composure. Each mission became a contest not only against enemy fire but against the unpredictable elements of war, sudden weather changes, mechanical failures, and the ever-present threat of miscalculated navigation. Despite these dangers, the squadron quickly distinguished itself in combat effectiveness. One notable mission involved a heavily defended Japanese ammunition depot near San Jose. The Aztec Eagles approached at dawn, their Thunderbolts streaking low over the treetops to avoid early detection. With synchronized precision, bombs were released in calculated intervals, detonating with a series of deafening explosions that shook the surrounding hills. Enemy resistance erupted immediately, anti-aircraft guns sent tracer rounds upward, and Japanese fighters appeared on the horizon, engaging in rapid aerial combat. Yet the squadron executed its plan flawlessly. The depot was destroyed, and despite minor damage to some aircraft, no lives were lost. Reports of the operation traveled quickly among Allied commanders, cementing the squadron's growing reputation as effective, disciplined, and fearless. Camaraderie within the unit deepened during these missions. The Aztec Eagles relied on one another not only for tactical coordination but for emotional support. In the cockpit, isolation could be overwhelming, the roar of engines, the sights of destruction below, and the constant threat of death weighed heavily. Pilots shared brief, Tense conversations over radios, exchanged hand signals during maneuvers, and celebrated small victories with quiet gestures. Letters home, when possible, became lifelines, capturing both the intensity of combat and the human vulnerability behind the uniforms. Many pilots wrote of the thrill of flight, the terror of anti-aircraft fire, and the solemn remembrance of fallen comrades. These personal accounts would later become a vital record of Mexico's participation in a war that had reshaped the globe. The squadron also faced logistical challenges that tested their ingenuity. Maintenance crews worked tirelessly to keep aircraft operational under extreme conditions. Jungle humidity and salt air threatened engines, wings, and electronic systems, while fuel shortages forced careful planning of sorties. Pilots learned to perform basic repairs themselves, developing hands-on skills that were crucial for survival. The bond between pilots and ground crew became an unspoken lifeline. Missions could not succeed without the tireless work of mechanics, engineers, and support staff who labored in heat, rain, and mud to ensure that every aircraft was ready for the next operation. Beyond tactical operations, the Aztec Eagles became symbols of hope and resilience for local populations. Filipino civilians, enduring years of Japanese occupation, watched the skies with awe as Mexican pilots engaged in daring strikes. Though many could not understand the language, the shared humanity was unmistakable. Villages liberated from enemy control witnessed the courage and skill of foreign allies who had come to aid their liberation. Pilots often observed from above, noting the courage of civilians who endured unimaginable hardship, drawing inspiration from their resilience. This dual perspective, fighting both an enemy in the air and supporting life on the ground, shaped the pilots' understanding of their mission beyond strategic objectives. They were also participants in a larger moral struggle against oppression. As months passed, the squadron accumulated experience, becoming more confident and precise. Night missions, low-altitude strafing runs, and coordinated attacks with U.S. units honed their skills. Each mission carried risk, but the Aztec Eagles learned to anticipate enemy tactics, navigate difficult terrain, and adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Successes were celebrated quietly within the unit, while failures were studied meticulously, ensuring that mistakes were never repeated. By the end of 1944, the Mexican squadron had flown more than 70 combat missions, each contributing materially and symbolically to the Allied effort. However, the human cost of combat was unavoidable. Pilots witnessed the deaths of comrades, enemy soldiers, and civilians caught in the crossfire. These realities weighed heavily, creating a profound awareness of the stakes. Letters and personal diaries reflect moments of fear, grief, and reflection, revealing that courage did not eliminate vulnerability but required confronting it repeatedly. The Aztec Eagles' experience was both a testament to skill and an intimate portrait of sacrifice. Every sortie demanded technical mastery, mental endurance, and emotional resilience. The Aztec Eagles' success also drew attention from military historians and journalists. Newspapers in Mexico highlighted the squadron's bravery, framing their victories not merely as tactical achievements but as emblematic of national pride and contribution to global security. Pilots became national heroes, their names recorded in official documents, their stories recounted in classrooms and homes. The squadron's role demonstrated that a small nation, far from the principal theaters of war, could make a tangible impact when courage, training, and determination aligned. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces prepared to launch final campaigns in the Pacific, the Aztec Eagles had solidified their reputation. They had endured tropical storms, enemy fire, and grueling operations. They had learned the realities of war in ways that transcended training manuals. Their Thunderbolts, once symbols of power and technology, had become extensions of their skill and spirit. The Squadron story, now intertwined with the broader history of World War II, reflected a journey from national outrage over attacks on Mexican shipping to active participation in a global struggle. It was a journey of courage, adaptation, and relentless commitment, setting the stage for the pivotal missions that would define the final chapter of their combat experience. Wings over Luzon, heroism and hardship. The skies over Luzon had a reputation that no pilot could ignore. They were vast, unpredictable, and fraught with peril. For the Aztec Eagles, each flight was an encounter with both the elements and an enemy who refused to yield. By early 1945, the squadron had already flown dozens of missions, yet the intensity of combat escalated as Allied forces launched final offensives to liberate the Philippines. These operations demanded not just courage, but precision, endurance, and unwavering focus. The dense tropical forests below concealed fortified positions, supply routes, and hidden artillery. Japanese forces, aware of the Allies' growing momentum, were determined to resist at all costs. The challenge for the Mexican pilots was immense: navigate unfamiliar terrain, avoid enemy fire, and ensure that each bombing or strafing run contributed to the larger strategy of liberation. The Aztec Eagles' first major mission of the campaign involved neutralizing a critical enemy airfield near Clark Field. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese fighters stationed there could strike Allied supply lines and disrupt the progress of ground troops. Planning the attack required a delicate balance of speed, stealth, and coordination. Flying in tight formations, the squadron descended from high altitudes, using cloud cover to mask their approach. Anti-aircraft fire erupted as they neared the target, flak shells tearing through the sky with explosive precision. The pilots executed evasive maneuvers learned through countless hours of training, weaving through the bursts while maintaining their attack vector. Bombs were released with meticulous timing, obliterating fuel depots and runways. The operation was hailed as a triumph of skill and strategy, and for the Aztec Eagles, it solidified their reputation as an effective strike force capable of altering the course of engagements on the ground. Yet heroism in the skies came at a high cost. The squadron experienced its first significant casualties during a series of night sorties targeting entrenched positions in mountainous terrain. Visibility was minimal, navigation instruments were prone to error, and enemy searchlights painted planes as targets for anti-aircraft guns. One pilot, recently promoted for his exceptional performance, failed to return after a bombing run. The loss was felt deeply across the unit, reminding every member that bravery alone could not shield them from the realities of war. Mourning and fear coexisted with determination. The squadron understood that hesitation could endanger not just the individual, but the mission and their comrades. Letters written home conveyed both sorrow and pride, capturing the duality of combat, the thrill of contribution tempered by the grief of loss. As the weeks progressed, the Aztec Eagles' operational tempo intensified. They were tasked with providing close air support for infantry units advancing toward heavily defended towns. These missions demanded extraordinary coordination. Pilots had to identify friendly positions, communicate with ground forces, and execute precise strafing or bombing runs without causing collateral damage. Mistakes could be catastrophic. The Thunderbolt, though robust, required careful handling to ensure that bombs were delivered accurately and aircraft remained intact. The pilots' training, combined with growing experience in actual combat, allowed them to navigate these missions with increasing confidence. Reports from ground commanders praised their efficiency, noting that Mexican pilots consistently delivered support when it was most critical, often turning the tide of localized engagements. One particularly daring operation involved a convoy of Japanese vehicles attempting to reinforce front-line positions near San Fernando. Intelligence suggested that the convoy was carrying ammunition and reinforcements that could stall the Allied advance. The Aztec Eagles launched a pre-dawn attack, flying low to evade radar detection. The engines of the Thunderbolts roared in unison, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness as pilots released bombs and executed strafing runs. The convoy was decimated, and the pilots returned to base with adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Such missions, repeated over days and weeks, highlighted not only the squadron's combat effectiveness but also the trust and synchronicity that had developed among the pilots. Every maneuver reflected shared experience, instinct honed through repetition, and an unspoken understanding that each man's survival depended on the others. Life in the Pacific, however, was not defined solely by combat. The squadron endured harsh living conditions, with makeshift airfields, primitive accommodations, and relentless tropical heat and humidity. Meals were often sparse, and medical facilities were limited. Despite these hardships, the Aztec Eagles adapted. Humor, camaraderie, and shared resilience became essential coping mechanisms. Pilots would recount stories of flights, tease one another about mistakes or close calls, and celebrate small victories. Music, letters from home, and cultural rituals from Mexico provided comfort, maintaining a sense of identity and morale amid chaos. These moments of humanity were vital. They reminded the pilots that beyond the machine of war, they remained young men confronting extraordinary circumstances. The psychological demands of combat also became apparent. Repeated exposure to life-threatening situations induced fatigue and stress. Pilots often reflected on their mortality, the fleeting nature of life, and the purpose of their struggle. Leadership within the squadron emphasized mental fortitude, encouraging younger pilots to support one another and maintain focus on the mission. Emotional resilience became as critical as technical skill. Those who struggled received guidance from seasoned comrades, fostering an environment where vulnerability was acknowledged but harnessed to strengthen collective resolve. Over time, this cultivated a culture of mutual reliance that proved indispensable in the grueling conditions of sustained warfare. By mid-1945, the Aztec Eagles had completed over 90 combat missions. Their achievements were recognized by Allied command, with commendations highlighting their bravery, precision, and unwavering dedication. Yet, each mission left an indelible mark. Pilots carried memories of destroyed villages, the courage of ground troops, and the faces of civilians caught in conflict. These experiences shaped not only their military careers but their personal identities, imbuing them with a profound understanding of sacrifice, duty, and the complexities of war. The squadron's effectiveness also influenced strategic planning. Commanders began integrating the Aztec Eagles into more critical operations, relying on their skill for high-risk missions that demanded both precision and innovation. The pilots embraced the challenge, executing sorties with creativity and daring. Their ability to operate under pressure, adapt to evolving threats, and maintain discipline in unpredictable conditions distinguished them from many contemporaneous units. Each successful mission reinforced the narrative that Mexico's contribution to the Pacific Campaign, though small in scale compared to larger powers, was significant in impact and symbolic in representation. As Allied forces closed in on Japanese strongholds, the Aztec Eagles' role shifted from tactical support to decisive action. They participated in coordinated attacks that disrupted supply chains, weakened defensive positions, and facilitated ground troop advances. Their presence was both practical and symbolic. The Thunderbolts cutting through the sky embodied Mexico's active participation in the global struggle, and each mission reinforced a sense of national pride back home. The stories of courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice spread quickly, inspiring citizens and reinforcing the notion that even distant nations could influence the trajectory of war. By the close of their Luzon campaign, the Aztec Eagles had forged a legacy of heroism and resilience. They had confronted danger relentlessly, adapted to extreme conditions, and executed operations with remarkable efficiency. The experience left an enduring imprint, both on the pilots themselves and on the broader narrative of Mexico's role in World War II. These young men, who had once trained under foreign skies, now returned to the world transformed, hardened by combat, bound by shared experience, and recognized as exemplars of courage, skill, and dedication. Homeward bound, legacy and recognition. As the Pacific War approached its final stages, the Aztec Eagles found themselves transitioning from relentless combat to missions that demanded strategic precision and careful timing. By mid-1945, Japanese resistance had begun to weaken, yet the threat remained unpredictable. The pilots understood that complacency could be as deadly as enemy fire. Each sortie required meticulous planning, coordination with Allied forces, and an acute awareness of changing conditions on the ground and in the air. Weather patterns, particularly typhoons sweeping across the islands, complicated operations, forcing pilots to adapt navigation techniques and adjust flight formations to ensure mission success while minimizing risk. These final months demanded an extraordinary combination of experience, skill, and mental endurance. One of the last major campaigns involved targeting fortified supply lines in northern Luzon, crucial for the Japanese defense of remaining strongholds. Intelligence suggested that several convoys carried both reinforcements and critical provisions intended to prolong resistance. The Aztec Eagles were tasked with intercepting and neutralizing these convoys before they reached front-line positions. Flying at dawn, the squadron descended over rugged terrain, navigating dense forests and narrow valleys. Visibility was poor, and the sound of engines echoed against the mountains, alerting enemy positions. Anti-aircraft fire erupted in sudden bursts, forcing pilots into sharp evasive maneuvers while releasing bombs with exacting precision. The operation disrupted enemy logistics, slowed reinforcements, and allowed Allied ground forces to advance more rapidly, demonstrating the squadron's continued strategic value even in the final months of the war. Beyond tactical accomplishments, these missions further cemented the pilots' camaraderie and mutual reliance. The stress of combat, combined with the physical toll of extended campaigns, tested endurance and morale. Pilots developed informal routines to maintain alertness, pre-flight exercises, shared briefings, and the exchange of advice on navigating unpredictable terrain. Humor, storytelling, and small personal rituals provided mental relief amid the intensity of operations. Even in moments of extreme danger, these practices helped preserve focus and cohesion, ensuring that the squadron functioned effectively as a unit. The bonds formed in the cockpit and on the ground transcended the battlefield, creating lifelong connections forged under extraordinary circumstances. In parallel with operational duties, the Aztec Eagles assumed a role as symbols of hope and inspiration. Local populations, still recovering from years of occupation, witnessed their daring flights and precise attacks. Villagers often observed the Thunderbolts slicing across the sky, a visible reminder of Allied support and the tangible presence of Mexican forces in their liberation. The pilots' actions carried weight beyond military outcomes, they embodied courage, solidarity, and a commitment to justice. Encounters with civilians, whether through brief landings, supply drops, or observation from above, reinforced a sense of moral purpose that complemented the technical and strategic aspects of their missions. As the Japanese surrender in August 1945 approached, the Aztec Eagles' role shifted from active engagement to support and stabilization operations. They participated in reconnaissance missions, assessing remaining enemy positions and identifying hazards for advancing Allied forces. These efforts were critical in preventing unnecessary casualties and ensuring a smooth transition from combat to occupation. Despite the easing of immediate danger, the pilots remained vigilant. Years of combat had ingrained habits of constant awareness, rapid decision-making, and disciplined coordination. Their professionalism ensured that the final phases of the campaign were executed with minimal incident, reflecting both operational competence and the enduring influence of their training. Recognition for the squadron's contributions began to arrive in formal channels. Allied commanders praised their effectiveness, noting that their actions had materially influenced the success of multiple campaigns. Reports highlighted the pilots' precision in targeting, adaptability under fire, and resilience in the face of challenging conditions. Awards and commendations followed, including acknowledgments from the United States military, further validating the significance of Mexico's participation in the Pacific theater. These honors not only celebrated individual and collective achievements but also elevated the squadron's profile as a symbol of national pride and international collaboration. Returning home was a profound experience for the Aztec Eagles. The journey back to Mexico was marked by reflection on months of combat, sacrifice, and personal growth. Pilots who had once been civilians, many with limited exposure to international warfare, returned as battle-hardened veterans with stories of bravery, loss, and perseverance. Their reintegration into civilian life was both joyous and challenging. Communities celebrated their return, organizing parades, ceremonies, and official receptions to honor their service. Families reunited after long separations, reconnecting with sons, brothers, and friends whose experiences had transformed them forever. Yet the psychological scars of combat persisted, and many pilots faced the task of reconciling their wartime experiences with peacetime existence. The legacy of the Aztec Eagles extended beyond individual accolades. Their contributions demonstrated that Mexico, a nation geographically distant from the central theaters of World War II, could exert tangible influence on global events. The squadron's missions showcase the capability of small, well-trained forces to perform with skill, precision, and courage in high-stakes environments. Furthermore, their actions reinforced the importance of international cooperation, illustrating how nations of diverse size and resources could unite against a common threat. For Mexico, the Aztec Eagles became enduring symbols of patriotism, sacrifice, and the capacity to make a difference on the world stage. Educational institutions, museums, and military academies soon incorporated the story of the Aztec Eagles into curricula and exhibitions. Students learned of their daring missions, the challenges they faced in unfamiliar terrain, and the teamwork that defined their operations. Personal artifacts, flight logs, photographs, letters, and medals preserved a tangible connection to history, allowing future generations to understand both the technical and human dimensions of their contributions. The narrative of the Aztec Eagles became a testament not only to military achievement but also to the resilience, creativity, and courage of individuals confronted with extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of their story was the human element. Beyond strategies, bombings, and reconnaissance, the squadron's experience reflected the complexity of moral courage in wartime. They confronted danger with skill and composure, but they also navigated fear, grief, and the ethical dilemmas inherent in combat. Letters and memoirs capture moments of doubt, relief, and triumph, offering an intimate perspective on the lived experience of war. These personal accounts transformed the squadron from a military unit into a symbol of perseverance, highlighting the universal qualities that define heroism, bravery, dedication, and empathy. By the end of 1945, as the world celebrated the conclusion of World War II, The Aztec Eagles had completed over 100 combat missions, contributing decisively to the liberation of the Philippines and the broader Allied effort. Their story, once confined to classified reports and battlefield communications, became a celebrated chapter in Mexico's military history. Through courage, adaptability, and relentless commitment, the squadron had transformed from a small group of volunteers into an elite unit recognized internationally. Their legacy endures, not only in historical records but in the imagination of generations inspired by their skill, valor, and unwavering dedication to a cause greater than themselves.